Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
The conversation of the day, Amy Wu Silverman joins us from the Royal Bank of Canada, RBC Capital Markets. Amy, you take the four cross moments and you bring it into the dispersion in the market, the huge variance of opinions. How does one navigate the markets with such wide dispersion?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that folks have been noodling on, because when you do have high dispersion in the market, so meaning some stocks are going one way, other stocks are going the other way, you do have this effect of it kind of canceling out on the index level and making signals like the VIX look lower than I think we feel it ought to be, right? You have close-to-close VIX hasn't even surpassed that 20, but we all feel the whiplash of those headlines, and part of the culprit for why it feels lower from a volatility perspective is that dispersion is so high. We don't have this big correlated co-move, particularly during earnings.
And now as we go into February, we have our Hobbesian double negative moment with Amy Wu Silverman. Amy, is it what I do in the market, or is what matter now what I avoid, what I do not choose to do?
You know, when you have these high dispersion environments, it really, really matters what you do. And, you know, my favorite stat about this is you could have the same level of VIX, Tom, you could have the same level of S&P drawdown, but in a high dispersion environment, if you made the right stock pick versus the wrong stock pick, you know, that outperformance differential could really be huge. It really matters if you're in the right sectors. It really matters if you're in the right stocks versus a high correlation environment where it's all macro, we're all riding one wave.
She's like the queen of active management. I mean, that's what we're talking about here.
Amy, there seems to be, you know, now we have President Trump back in office here, the headline risk seems to be back into this market. How do you suggest that investors hedge that? Should they hedge that? Should they not worry about it? Should they look through it? What do you say?
You know, look, first of all, I don't drive, but for some reason I really like driving analogies, and my volatility outlook was called watch out for potholes. And that's exactly what we're going to get. You know, when you have someone like Trump in power, we're just talking, there are these potholes you're going to get. It could be like an August 5th. It could be like a February 2018. You know, we got our fingers and toes crossed. But because of that, you know, I do think hedging makes sense. And simply because the positioning's gotten a lot more long after 2 consecutive 20+% S&P years, right? There's just more to hedge. And we do see that starting to climb up in the skew. In Tom's favorite word, the curve is you are seeing that hedging demand rise much more than it has in the past 2 years.
So I guess maybe one of the more recent headline risk has just been tariffs. Do your clients care about that? Do they think it's a risk? Do they kind of look through that and say, hey, it's just a negotiating tool. We're not going to worry about the economic impacts?
You know, it's so funny when we have these kind of macro client roundtables, the most surprising kind of anecdote I can tell you is clients just say that they believe Trump will manage the stock market. And obviously there's no sort of fundamental analysis there, but I can't tell you how many times I've heard that they just think the stock market will be okay, that this is all just part of a negotiation tactic. And that's another reason why I think you don't see these volatility potholes kind of priced out to these fatter left tails that you feel like they ought to be given the headlines. That, you know, that is anecdotally what investors keep telling me.
I'm reading Roger Altman as I try to get into the baseball season. One of his classic books from years ago, it's The Tigers, 1968, Norm Cash. Al Kaline, Amy Wu doesn't know what this is. But the answer is the baseball analogy, Amy Wu, that sort of like a batting average, 30% of the stocks go up and 70% don't really participate. Which way are we in that direction? Are we talking about fewer winners and more malaise, or the other way around?
I really think investors hope it's the other way around, and we've seen fits and starts of that, right? So particularly after the DeepSeek news, there was this question of if mega cap tech's going to keep holding us up. And when you saw that rotation, when that Monday that news came out, where did we go to? We went to all the breadth widening trades that have had fits and starts since last year. But I do think that's what investors still believe is their keystone for this market being healthy. Of course, mega cap tech has to be okay, Tom. It's just too much of a concentration not to be. But small mid cap or breadth widening trades, that's still what investors are really hoping for this market to be buoyed up to this year.
Amy, where do you see value in this market? I think some people, they're trying to get away a little bit from maybe the Mag 7 kind of concentration risk into this market, looking for maybe some value outside of that. Where do you guys see that?
So one thing that we've talked about as one of our pillars for hedging is because you have this index suppression, S&P hedging may not necessarily be your best bet. We have a lot of thematic baskets where we think that hedging differential makes a lot of sense. So, if you believe in IA versus you don't believe in IA, actually using those thematic basket differentials as hedges versus using your traditional tools like S&P.
Keep us out of suspense. I understand the New York Mets are a thematic basket, particularly after bringing Alonso on board. Give us an example, Amy Wu Silverman, of a thematic basket.
So we have a lot of them, and it's sort of, it's very driven by clients, but a good example is what stocks would benefit from AI continuing. They don't necessarily have to be AI specific names. They could be AI adjacent names like utilities. And then we have the opposite, right? We have your traditional cyclical baskets. When you look at that differential, Tom, in the weighted average implied volatilities, to me, that gives you a much better sense of where risk is right now than just purely using something like the S&P index. And we look at those differentials really closely because it gives us a sense much more of skew nowadays than just looking at the index level.
Okay, well, where's the value trap right now on a quantitative basis? When you look at the harmful, you got to hedge, and if you want to avoid a value trap, how do you study that, and what do you avoid?
I think what you avoid right now is getting trapped in the dispersion on that index level. So for instance, if you are thinking about a hedge right now, you may actually be better off with idiosyncratic hedges because of where dispersion is than using something like S&P or something that is much more going to benefit if you get a pickup in correlation. To me, that's the difference right now in this market. That wasn't true in a higher correlation environment. To me, that's the trick right now when you're thinking about hedging your portfolio.
Was that enough math? I mean, it's just
plenty.
like my brain is. What she just said there, let me translate it, folks. She said, use the Boston Red Sox as a hedge. That's what she said.
Amy, with the stock markets at or near all-time highs here, are you seeing downside protection? Are folks hedging some of their gains here?
They are. To me, it's really interesting, right? Because if you look at the past 2 years, we were in this FOMO, YOLO market. Everyone was buying call options. But, the one distinction I'll tell you is it's really a dichotomy between what institutional investors are doing and what retail is doing. We're actually still continuing to see that bid to the right tail on the retail side. It's mostly the institutional investors that are now thinking more about protecting their portfolio. And then that goes back to what I had said earlier about, well, how do we protect our portfolios right now in a high dispersion environment? Do we use our traditional indices, or do we think much more sector and stock specific, use those thematic baskets? I don't know baseball at all, but I guess they're like the Boston Red Sox, but be much more specific about that in an environment where, some things are going one way and some things are going the other way.
When you see the 10-year yield come in, I mean, it's more like a Francis Donald question, but when you see the yield space come in and the somewhat exuberance within the cacophony of political news, including in Canada, Amy Wu Silverman, is this a bull market? And the answer is, I'm sorry, we're printing higher, it seems.
We certainly are. And, to me, it's one of those, it's going to be great until you get that volatility pothole, right? It's going to be great till you get that August 5th or that February 2018. But, the one thing I'll say about what Besant said about targeting that yield versus targeting rates is we have to really be careful, Tom, about watching the rates versus equity vol correlations changing, because that's a relationship we've been counting on, just like bond equity correlation. But, when people start to kind of say we're thinking about this, then you have to watch that relationship, because if that breaks, we see a lot of other things breaking too.
Amy, nobody cares. All they want to know is Skylar Caruso over at People magazine has Jason confirming Taylor Swift will be at the Super Bowl to support Travis. Okay, great. We have to remind everyone, Amy Wu Silverman dragged her daughter to see Taylor Swift. They were like
and screaming
in like row 6 or something.
Yeah.
I mean, Taylor was waving at him and all that. Give us a Taylor Swift update, Amy Wu Silverman. I mean, do you go with the Chiefs just because she's going to darken the door in New Orleans?
I guess, look, I know so little about football. Like, it's worse than what I know about baseball. But if that's where Team Taylor is, I guess that's where we are too. So go Chiefs.
Okay. Amy Wu Silverman, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. RBC Capital Markets.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
David Rosenberg leads his note this morning with comments on the Secretary of Treasury. David, just to begin with, can the Secretary of Treasury single-handedly lower the 10-year yield?
No. One word or less.
There you go. So what do you expect to hear from our Secretary of the Treasury? What would you like to hear from the Secretary?
Well, the assumption is that that Besson has any real influence on the president. I think that we don't really know the answer to that, but we know that Donald Trump is going to do what he wants to do. So it really comes down to what he says and ultimately what he does and what you think his objectives are. But to me, the most important voice by far is what the president has to say. I don't think Scott Besson has the same degree of influence on Trump, say, that Bob Rubin may have had on Bill Clinton back in the day. So, I have tremendous respect for the Treasury Secretary, but I question just how much influence he really has.
We're going to get to this with David Rosenberg. I did a panel with him up in Toronto that was like riveting on the politics of Canada. And I've been reading the Globe and Mail, David Shribman, and others up there. I want to get to that in a moment. You have a headline, David Rosenberg, that's classic David, and it's the bond bullion barbell outpaces the equity market. To me, that's fascinating. Describe the bond bullion barbell.
Well, it's the barbell or the blended return between the two safe havens, which are treasuries and gold, which combined have generated a total return of around 6% so far this year. The S&P 500 total return is 4.5%. And just a reminder to people out there who have ice in their veins and the risk-on momentum trade that's dominating the headlines, that actually, when you look risk for reward, combined bonds and gold have actually been a better strategy year to date, still early on, than the equity market's been. So that was basically the message, is that if you're looking for alternatives, that particular strategy is actually a great stabilizer, not just a stabilizer, but also is adding alpha to your total portfolio.
David, tomorrow here in the United States, we're going to get the non-farm payrolls here. What are you looking for? And how do you think the Fed's going to kind of look at this data?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, the question is not just about non-farm payrolls, but about just the data right now in general. How much influence are they going to have? Because the Fed has already laid down the gauntlet that nothing is happening in the first half of the year. And you remember, you go back a few months ago, we had a ton of rate cuts being priced in immediately. And that's not happening because of all the Trump uncertainty. So I'm not so sure that tomorrow's number is going to have a big influence on the Fed. Of course, the markets will trade around it. We just had back-to-back months, the new Powell inflation indicator. It's no longer, the super core, the CPI X energy X shelter. It's the market-based core PC deflator, which he's discussed several times. And that metric has come in at 0.1% each of the past 2 months. And I think without all the Trump uncertainty, especially regarding tariffs And you could argue also fiscal policy, although right now fiscal policy is tightening on the spending side. So it's really mostly about tariffs. The Fed would still be talking about cutting rates right now when you're talking about what the trend in the market-based core PC deflator. It's running now on a 3 and 6 month basis right at the 2% target. And this has become Powell's favorite indicator. But they're actually signaling that they're on hold indefinitely. And that's because of all the policy uncertainty that we have in front of us. And we have to wait for that clarity to come to the fore whenever it does come to the fore. But the Fed right now is signaling nothing's going on rate-wise until the summer. So tomorrow's number, I don't think, is going to bear a lot unless, we're going to get revisions to the household survey and the payroll survey. They'll probably show some convergence. We're going to get, the numbers coming off that new population count based on the immigration file or the previous boom in immigration. So the question for me is going to be the big number tomorrow, actually, after we all look at the non-farm payroll headline and the revisions, is how did this affect the unemployment rate?
Right.
And so insofar as that nudges the unemployment rate up, tells the Fed there's more slack than they thought, and that could, maybe bring marginally the date forward for when they might start cutting interest rates again. But to me, nothing much beyond that.
David, I know in your note this morning you talk about the U.S. trade deficit and a big dent to U.S. growth coming from the widening trade deficit. You're focused on the trade deficit, but I don't think the folks in Congress are. How do you think about the U.S. trade deficit?
Well, I'm looking more at the components. Like we've had a big decline in exports in December, and they're down precipitously 3 of the past 4 months. And what that's telling me is one thing is about the impact of the super strong U.S. dollar. People, I don't think, are recognizing just how much financial conditions in the U.S. have tightened over the course of the past few months. And on top of that, It's also telling me that just how weak the global economy is right now, that we're seeing the export side really starting to not just decelerate, but now contract. So, of course, it's going to lead to fourth quarter GDP downward revisions to what we already saw from the Commerce Department. But it's telling us something about the state of the global economy, both in Asia and Europe, that it's coming back to hit home in terms of the reduction in exports. And exports have a very powerful multiplier impact on the rest of the industrial sector. And you're right, nobody else is talking about it. So I thought, okay, I guess I'll corner that market.
David Rosenberg with us. We continue with Rosenberg Research, Toronto. Thrilled that he's with us this morning. Futures up 16. They advance across the arc of the morning. Here, 19 minutes away from a market open. We welcome all of you on a commute across the nation, across Canada as well. And of course, on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Paul and I really humbled by the statistics for January. They let us into the statistics. I have to buy lunch.
Big numbers.
But,
Yep.
They forced me to buy lunch, but, that's fine.
McDonald's is fine.
There we were. David Rosenberg, you and I did this panel up in Toronto. I was shocked at what I perceived as the struggle of the Canadian spirit in Toronto. And I want you to explain the politics right now. I've got CBC here with the Conservatives with 43% of the vote, the Liberals, whoever's going to replace Trudeau, with 23% of the vote. Is it like France where they get together in a coalition? Or is it just, in our translation, Republicans versus Democrats?
Well, another great question. It's a parliamentary system here.
But
it's not as fragmented as it is over in Europe. There's really 3 main parties. And actually, for the past several years, because the Liberals didn't have a majority, the Justin Trudeau Liberals had to team up with the Socialist NDP party to be able to, not have a majority, but have a coalition so that there wouldn't be a non-confidence vote. A few months ago, that coalition broke, and now, of course, we're in a leadership race, and Parliament is closed right now, and then we'll have probably an election sometime, I would expect, during the spring. So it's not as fragmented. I don't think that unless we have a minority government, we're not going to have a coalition. And if the polls are accurate right now, I'm not so sure that they are, because we don't know who's going to be leading the Liberal Party. Mark Carney being an outsider and being hailed, of course, as having all these tremendous global economic and financial credentials. And he's not going to be tainted by the past number of years of failed Liberal policies. he'll be a fresh face. I would expect that if we have this conversation a couple of months from now, Tom, that those polls are going to narrow in if Carney wins the Liberal leadership race, which I think he probably will at this point. But if the election was held today, based on those polls, it would be a Brian Mulroney-like landslide majority for the Conservatives. But I wouldn't extrapolate that, because if Carney emerges victorious, he's going to pack a very powerful punch.
Do you or anyone have any idea what happens in, 27 days? Like it's a 30-day tariff thing?
Sure.
David, do you have any idea what happens in 27 days?
Well, I don't think the tariffs are going to be coming, notwithstanding the quotes 30-day reprieve, because we have to look at the facts that are presented in front of us. Last Friday at the White House, when asked if there was any chance that the tariffs on Canada and Mexico would be averted, he said, no, not a chance. They're a done deal. And then one phone call on Monday with Mexico and 2 in Canada. Next thing you know, well, no, we got a 30-day reprieve. So remember, he changed his mind as to when he was going to level the tariffs. He still has the power to do that. And so the question becomes why? Because let's talk about Canada. What did Canada really do? Like, what did we do? What, like a fentanyl czar? Like, what is that? So we'll have a few helicopters and drones looking over the border, the $1.3 billion of more border security and enforcement. Justin Trudeau already pledged that quite a while ago. So, what really changed? Well, what really changed is that Canada and Mexico moved a little bit. And now Donald Trump can once again claim a win to the U.S. general public. He got a win from Canada, got a win from Mexico, got a win from Colombia, got a win from Panama. So he's just collecting all these wins. Of course, I think that they're inflated, but I think that the bottom line here is that it comes back to the initial question about Scott Besson, about that they want to get inflation down. They want to get so in answer to the question, can he directly get the 10-year note yield down? Well, not directly, but indirectly. Forego all the tax stimulus and keep your focus on the spending restraint right now. Well, that's a help. And anything you can do to reduce inflation expectations, will tell me that's not going to bring down the 10-year Treasury note yield. So certainly, he can have an influence from a fiscal policy standpoint. But you have to ask yourself the question, why did Trump change his mind? And why do I think he was never taken seriously or literally? He campaigned on a lot of things, but the biggest campaign message was he was going to unwind the rest of all the Biden inflation. He was going to bring gasoline and grocery prices down, didn't you know? Well, how are you going to do that and then put a tariff on Mexico, which supplies 60% of U.S. food imports, or 30%? Canada supplies 60% of oil imports. There would be a massive inflation shock, even temporarily, and that would work against his objectives. So as I think about it, and I wasted too much time on the weekend worrying and writing about it, it was never going to happen. It didn't happen, and I still have Canadians here are still on tenterhooks about what's going to happen on March 1st. I'm telling them, he's not going to do it. Maybe he'll get more concessions and show that I got more wins, but it's to me basically, Justin Trudeau had a chance to actually call Trump's bluff, but he didn't. But no, I don't think. I think that if anything is close to 0% probability, I do not think the tariffs are coming in either country, because it's going to work against it's going to work against Trump's legacy. I
got to squeeze this in 1 minute. David, one of the reasons I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan is at gunpoint, we had a family that we knew called the Great Britons, and we would go up to the Thousand Islands of 2 lifetimes ago, David Rosenberg, and there was this relationship between America and Canada wrapped around the St. Lawrence Seaway and Gananoque up to Montreal. Is that gone?
Well, it's I wouldn't say it's gone, but it's been impaired, at least for now. I don't like the fact that we're booing national anthems. I mean, this is more about half the U.S. population voted against Trump. Like, what are you booing against? It's really about the president. So boo the president. But the reality is that politics will come, politics will go. I wouldn't
Okay.
extrapolate this into the future. But right now, I got to say, Canadians, generally speaking, and of course I live in Toronto, they're feeling really hurt by what's happened. And the thing is that I don't think the tariffs are going through, but the die's been cast and the damage is done. By the way, Tom, not just here, but in the U.S. too, because of the uncertainty that's being implemented into not just the financial markets, but in the economy. I think you're going to find the one thing that's going to be shelved in both Canada and the United States, because of the specter and the threat of the tariff, there's going to be shelving capital spending plans because of all this uncertainty.
I'm out of time. Michael Barr says, get out the hook. David Rosenberg, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. David Rosenberg of Rosenberg Research on his Canada.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
This from the Washington Post. This time, the anti-Trump resistance is in the courts, not in the streets. For both of you supporting the president and those upset at the president, Wendy Schiller with us now, professor at Brown University. The subtitle, Professor Schiller, is the president issues orders that some say disregard the law. A haphazard group of opponents is filing lawsuits. Where is the judiciary, Professor Schiller?
Well, good morning, Tom. Good morning, Paul and Lisa. The judiciary, we have to wait and see which judiciary. As we know, venue shopping, which is the term that describes people who are interested in getting a particular ruling from the federal courts, find a plaintiff in particular jurisdictions to match what the ruling is that they want. So the Ninth Circuit in California is thought to be somewhat liberal. The Fifth Circuit, that deals with Texas mostly, and Oklahoma and Louisiana, is thought to be quite conservative. So those are appeals court circuits. You start in the district courts and you really venue shop to see, can you get a judge? We had a ruling from a Rhode Island judge that will issue a ruling that at least will give an injunction or some time for you to mobilize other forces in the American political system.
So I got somebody in Bethesda listening to 99.1 FM. Good morning, Nathan Hager. His food court's better than ours.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know what that's about.
It's very good.
Wendy, that person in Bethesda now, looking at Doge or, name the crisis. I guess they're going after the FAA tomorrow, whatever. Whatever the crisis is, how long do they wait for the judiciary, whether Texas or California, to show up?
Well, they've already showed up, right? I mean, there have already been injunctions against the birthright executive order, for example, most recently, the spending, the freeze on the money that was spent. There already are temporary injunctions, but they're temporary. They have to really go to court and get them more firm if they want to do any stalling or blocking. And so it's going to crawl through the courts. And the question is, does the Trump administration pay attention to the federal courts? Will they actually abide by federal rulings? In the past, we've had state governors that said no to the federal government. It's unusual to have the federal government, the executive branch, say no to the federal courts. That's coming. And I think that's something we haven't seen before. And the impact of all these orders, Tom, we just simply don't know. I mean, first of all, he issues orders, then he takes it back. Or he issues orders and then he qualifies. So in terms of the Trump administration, how much is real? Firing federal employees seems to be quite real. The impact that the average American will feel, that's going to take a while.
So, Wendy, the news flow, not surprisingly, continues to be pretty darn steady coming out of Washington, D.C. What's the feeling about this Gaza news over the past couple of days? Was it an off-the-cuff remark? Was it a serious policy initiative? What are you hearing from your sources?
I can only, as I always do, speculate, but it is so in keeping with Donald Trump. He sees a beautiful property. I mean, it's on the water. It's beautiful. The weather's great. He literally, I think, perceives this as a good deal. A good deal for Palestinians, a good deal unless they're forcibly removed, obviously, which would not be a good deal. But he's saying nothing's ever stuck. And if you don't have economic livelihood, you can't survive. And that is true. So, not every single thing Donald Trump says is untrue. We don't have any right to take it over at all, buy or sell or displace anybody. But when you think about his mindset, it's totally in keeping with Donald Trump's mindset to solve the problem through a business deal.
Was this the way Andrew Jackson was?
Andrew Jackson didn't have nearly as many layers of government, despite Jefferson's effort to build a bureaucracy. And he was a general. I mean, you know this story. You know very well about Eisenhower, how frustrated he was as president of the United States because he had been, the leader of the European theater in World War II. He was a general, and he would say things and they wouldn't get done. Trump has a general's mentality in that sense, and he wants things done. That's why he's letting Musk run the way he is. But when you can't fly because that's not working, when your water is no longer clean because that's not working, then we have to see whether there's any public reaction.
So, Wendy, I guess one of the more nuts and bolts things coming out of Washington is they need to get a budget strategy going here. There's a lot of legislation that's kind of queued up over the next several months. Do we have any idea how this will play out? Is the Trump administration, do they have a game plan for some of this legislation and some of this budgetary issues?
This is a jockeying between the House and the Senate vis-a-vis Trump. The Senate promises reconciliation, which means that you don't get filibustered. That means you can guarantee that you will get a budget through and the tax cut bill through, just as Obama used it for the Affordable Care Act. You can promise that to Trump. So in the game of delivering, John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader Republican, can deliver, whereas Mike Johnson does not have the votes to deliver the same budget because the very far right fiscal hawks want deeper cuts that the Senate won't take. So Thune's saying, listen, side with us, put pressure on the House because our people won't take those cuts, and then you've got a government that'll shut down. Here's the thing to watch for. Democratic strategy may be to shut down the government. I'm just throwing it out there, but I'm just saying if you're going to stop this juggernaut of firing people and shutting things down, shut the government down.
Oh, so Wendy, you're quaffing lunch at Tammany Hall Pub and Parlor in Providence. There's like 4 Republicans at Brown. Yep. That's where they go to lunch. Yep. So Professor Schiller, you're with the Republicans, the conservatives at Tammany Hall Pub and Parlor. And they ask you, when is Mr. Musk shown the door? How do you frame that discussion, that dialogue right now about this absolutely original thing that is Doge?
Again, the same mantra over and over again. When people who live in red-leaning states feel the impact severely from some of the lack of government oversight, the lack of government inspection. We've got a bird flu that seems to be persistent, that's affecting now Nevada. You need the federal government to come in and help. USDA, you need CDC, you need these entities. And when they aren't there and nobody is picking up the phone and you can't get help, sooner or later, you will turn on the federal government and turn on Donald Trump. And if that happens and his ratings go down, his poll numbers have already gone down a little bit since he was elected, then he'll look to Musk and he'll conveniently probably blame Elon Musk and show him the door.
Right.
But for a lot of people, that may take too long for them to sort of escape any kind of injury or harm. So we'll have to see. You can make the federal government more efficient. I think there's a reasonable argument to make, but the way that they're doing it may be too abrupt.
And what's your
And there are more than 4 Republicans at Brown. I will just tell you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go wild today, 10. Wendy, just on Doge and Mr. Musk, we got 40,000 people. I guess they're showing the door in September. I don't know. What's your timeline on Elon Musk? Do you have in your head, like, this guy's got through the weekend? Does this guy got through March? Does this guy got to the next Tesla earnings? What's the Schiller timeline on Mr. Musk?
Well, just one simple thing. A lot of federal grants run on a January schedule and a July schedule. So now you're dealing with the people who did apply in January or were going to, and now you're thinking about July. And as that money freezes up, it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. People are going to feel it all over the country, in their hospital systems in particular. So I think I'm looking at June or July in terms of impact. All these changes, what are the impact? And now you're going to have Robert F. Kennedy most likely getting through at HHS. That's another huge feeder of money from the federal government to individuals and institutions. When that money gets blocked, services may not be able to be provided, and then people are going to feel it. It's the same scenario as Newt Gingrich in 1995. He was really riding high January to July, and then things fell off the rails.
Huge insight. Yep. That's what we love having Professor Schiller on.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.
It's a daily look at the front pages. Lisa Mateo reports she's far beyond driven. Lisa, what do you have?
Okay, countdown to the Super Bowl, right? So the Wall Street Journal has us look into the new trends that you're going to see during the commercials, because the commercials, a big draw for the Super Bowl, right? So one burger chain is bringing back an old marketing strategy. Listen to this.
And I've got just what you need to cure that post-party bug. The Carl's Jr. Hangover Burger.
Carl's Jr. bringing the sexy advertising back, bikinis and burgers. You remember Paris Hilton, right? Kim Kardashian, they started this whole commercial trend. Now it's influencer Alex Earl, okay?
Who?
For those of you who are watching YouTube, you can see the commercial right now. Okay. There you go. But the experts are saying that it shows the shift. Yes, there it is. See, remember Paris Hilton? Oh my! See, no one's paying attention to Lisa.
Am I the only one on the planet that doesn't know Carl? Is The Rock in a commercial? That's all I want to know.
No. But what they're saying is that they're saying that it's kind of the country feeling, the new feeling under the new administration.
Nice.
That's what they're saying. So the new administration is saying going back to old ways, and this Carl's Jr. going back to old ways they used to do commercials.
Can I just suggest maybe it will be a pleasant relief for all from what everybody's going through on a day-to-day basis.
Huh?
Like you get to Sunday and it's actually like football.
Yeah, be a good football game. We'll have some fun.
Oh, there you go. You know who else is doing it? OpenAI is actually debuting a commercial at the Super Bowl. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. So stay tuned for that. Sports books. Okay, so they want to cash in on the Taylor Swift fever at the Super Bowl, but it's not that easy. So novelty prop bets, you know what I'm talking about, right? Super Bowl centering on Taylor Swift, like will Travis Kelce propose to Taylor Swift on the field? Like those kind of bets, okay? But they're on unregulated sites, so the real guys can't get to it, but they're doing something different. So DraftKings is coming up with a quick way. They're called Swiftie Specials. Nice. So these kind of bets. So prop bets that are named after Swift's songs. So for example, you have the Shake It Off bet, right? Okay, which has the Philadelphia Eagles scoring first and the Chiefs to win. And then you have the Mine bets, which is Swift's boyfriend Kelce getting 87 or more receiving yards and scoring one or more touchdowns. You see, so they're kind of using it that way in order to get it to be allowed on their sites.
On this stuff, I guess.
So the answer is if the Eagles win, it's a champagne problems bet.
Right.
That's one of her songs.
Champagne problems.
There you go. I didn't think I knew that, did you? Next.
Okay, moms and dads, I'm having trouble keeping up with the lingo that the kids are coming up with. It's fast and furious. The Journal's saying it's because of social media. So, for example, remember Riz? That was like the hot word. It's old. It's old already.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so you have to get to the new words like Betamaxing, Gyat, GigaChad, Batty. Have you heard any of these?
Nope.
Sigma. Okay. So, Tom, if your daughter calls you Omega, like you're so Omega, that's a bad thing.
That's a bad thing?
Just letting you know. Okay. So if it comes up at the dinner table,
she said
you're
that
prepared.
last night. I said, no, go Tridel. Don't go Chi Omega. Go Tridel. And it didn't work.
Omega is like the lowest rate you can get.
The lowest rate
Omega?
you can
I'll
get.
use that today.
Yes.
Yes.
Get one more in here. Squeeze one more in here.
And that's also AM radio could get a second wind.
Yes.
We're very excited about this, okay? Objections from EV manufacturers, you remember that, right? But bipartisan legislation advancing again in the Senate, so it could come back and get a second wind again.
The newspapers, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday, 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.